Wszystko zaczęło się od króla Jagiełły. Mała Łodzia stała się miastem, które w XIX wieku rozwijało się najszybciej na świecie. W ciągu zaledwie 60 lat od powstania pierwszej manufaktury powstaje przemysłowa, wielonarodowościowa metropolia. Jednak wiatry historii nie zawsze jej sprzyjały. To, co zniszczył los, odbudowują łodzianie. Nasza Łódź. Miasto wielkich szans. Od 600 lat w sercu Polski i Europy.
Jesteśmy Polakami. Jesteśmy niezwykłym społeczeństwem. Zawsze w obliczu wielkiego wyzwania potrafimy się mobilizować. Potrafimy stawić czoła wielkim wyzwaniom. Bo nie potrafimy stać obojętnie. Bo obchodzi nas bezpieczeństwo i przyszłość naszych dzieci. Bo wierzymy, że nadzieja zwycięża apatię, lęk i strach. Bo mimo wszelkich przeciwności nigdy się nie poddajemy. Potrafimy ciężko pracować, wspierać się i działać razem. Bo zależy nam na naszej ojczyźnie, naszym osiedlu, naszej ulicy. Bo chcemy naszych niezbywalnych praw i wolności. Bo nie oddamy naszych marzeń. Nadchodzi punkt zwrotny.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our very last discussion of this very intense but beautiful day. I hope that you are still awake and capable and able to keep attention. My name is Barbora Krempaská and I am the project manager of the German Liberal Foundation, Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom. We are based in Prague and cover project in Central Europe and Baltic states. And today we will address really serious issues. The topic of our discussion is lessons of the past and present, impacts of the Russian war in Ukraine on Central and Eastern Europe. And today it is the day 570 of the aggressive war in Ukraine. The Russian war in Ukraine has emerged as a critical turning point, as the whole topic of this event. Critical turning point for Europe, with far-reaching implications for our regional stability, for the international relations, and the very foundations of our European security. This conflict, which began attention in 2014 already with Russian annexation of Crimea, has fundamentally altered our geopolitical landscape of this continent. It has challenged the post-Cold War order in Europe and also in the world, obviously, strengthened international alliances and exposes deep divisions among the European nations and also among our Central European nations. So the consequences of this conflict extend far beyond Ukraine and making it a pivotal moment for Europe and also a big opportunity for our Central European countries. And we will discuss this topic with very distinguished guests, which I would like to introduce now. I will start on my left with Jan Farfał, historian, columnist in Visegrad Inside, PhD candidate at Oxford University within the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies. Then Wojciech Przybylski, editor-in-chief of Visegrad Inside and president of the Respublika Foundation. political analyst heading Visegrad Insight Policy Foresight on European Affairs. On my right, Piotr Łukasiewicz, Polish soldier, political scientist, diplomat, reserve colonel of the Armed Forces of the Republic of Poland, Polish ambassador to Afghanistan from 2012 to 2014. Then Dr. Lars-André Richter, designated head of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom Office for the Baltic states and Central Europe, based in Prague, and previously based in offices in Seoul and Buenos Aires. And I see that we have also our remote speaker from Ukraine. Welcome to Nataliya Melnyk, Ukrainian researcher and executive director of the Bendukidze Free Market Center, an independent Ukrainian think tank founded in Kyiv in 2015. So, I have prepared a warm-up question for you because we are now speaking about lessons learned. So please define in one short sentence, if possible, what should be, from your point of view, considered as the biggest lessons learned since the beginning of the Russian full-scale aggression in Ukraine. Please, Jan.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah, right. So I think that one of the most important lessons would be that we were fundamentally wrong about our presumptions about the global order and the developments about it. So that would be one sentence, but I can explain it in 2 or 3 more. So shortly before February last year, we thought that the major military conflict on our continent would be impossible. We were wrong about it. We thought that the Russian army is powerful and Ukraine will not last for more than 3 days. We were wrong about it. And after withdrawal from Afghanistan, we thought that Americans would not play such a decisive role in global matters. We were wrong about it. And we are just at the beginning of the attempts of the reconfiguration of the global world order, and we are not quite sure what's going on, and we need to rethink our conceptions about it.
Oh, thank you. So, contrary to Jan, I will try to draw more future-oriented lesson. The war in Ukraine, the crisis in Ukraine, conflict in Ukraine, has proven that alliances work. West is united. NATO works, despite all the problems that Jan mentioned in the past. So this is the lesson, that West is back. It's because 2 factors. It's because the very strong moral clarity of this war, and the second is global considerations, global factors that influence, well, especially United States, but in a broader sense, Western community of Western or democratic-oriented countries. It's not even only Western. It's a community of democratic governments and societies.
It was really a long sentence. Dr. Richter?
Yes, thank you. That is working. Great, wonderful. As a third in the row, I might say, so I agree with everything which was said. I might add then it's very important what former German Chancellor Helmut Kohl, I'm not a big fan of him, but he was right. We need to listen to smaller European countries. Very important. If we would have done that, I think, I'm talking from the German point of view, then I think we would have done a better job.
Wojciech?
Right. If this is a lesson, it's a repeated lesson that war is a transformative power. And in this lesson, we have learned that this war is transforming Europe from merely a peace project to a foreign policy actor, as we see it.
Thank you. And Natalia, I hope you can hear us. Can you tell us what is the biggest lesson for Ukraine?
Hello. I will to be Can you hear me okay? Yeah. So the main lessons would be that the idea of nuclear states being able to stop other nuclear states from attacking non-nuclear powers is obviously not working from our experience. And a lesson learned for the future is certainly that this instability in Europe is going to last for quite some time because from our perspective, we don't see this war ending anytime soon, and we don't think that the threat coming from Russia will go away after the war is over.
Thank you very much, and I am happy you mentioned all the points we will cover today. So I'm happy that we are on the same wave here. And I will continue with Nataliya because we are speaking about the implications of the Russian war in Ukraine. So Nataliya, could you please elaborate and tell us what has changed in Ukraine since February 24, 2022? How does a state work during the war? What is the current internal political situation in your country?
So it's difficult to actually believe that it's almost been 2 years of the full-scale invasion. We're almost there. When we talk about the internal situation, the first point is the unity within the country. We have some fresh surveys coming in that say fewer than 5% of Ukrainians will agree to give up some more of Ukrainian territory for the war to end. And about 18% would agree to giving up on NATO membership for Ukraine in order to end the war. So as we see, the majority of Ukrainians are on the same page. As for the state and how it's working, well, it's all powerful right now. As you know, we have martial law that has been in place since the very first day of the first invasion. And of course, it raises certain concerns, especially the ones that are being actively discussed both in the country and outside, especially in the West. It's the matter of elections. So we originally had parliamentary elections scheduled for October of this year and presidential elections for the spring of next year. And according to our constitution, elections cannot be held during martial law that's in effect. And that's according to our constitution. And our constitution cannot be changed during martial law, so we're in a bit of a conundrum right now because our allies are pushing actively for us to hold elections. But for now, we don't know how it's possible. And we're also dealing with a number of corruption scandals unraveling in the country. I'm sure that you heard at least about some of them. And one of the latest developments in the country is Zelensky vetoing a parliamentary bill that was supposed to retain closed asset declarations for officials in Ukraine. This decision, not the veto, but the parliamentary bill itself, raised a lot of unhappiness among the general public, and they appealed to the president to veto the bill, which he did, which is a good development, and opening declarations of official assets is an important step toward towards getting rid of as much corruption as we possibly can in the near future. So that's a positive development. Other than that, we are in a better shape than we probably would expect it to be almost 2 years in. But I'm not going to talk about because that's a whole lot different.
Thank you very much. I am really happy to hear some positives also, that you are dealing as good as you can. And we all know, and it was repeated all the time, that the fate of Ukraine lies not only in the hands of the brave Ukrainians, but also in our hands. And the victory of Ukraine lies also and is bounded to the aid of the Western countries, the financial and military aid. And after a year and a half of the war, we still find ourselves in a situation when some countries are not helping to the extent that they would be expected. And perhaps you see where I am heading when I turn to Dr. Richter. Germany has promising to take over a greater responsibility for European stability and security for years, at least since the annexation of Crimea. Despite the warning voices of Central European countries, many Western leaders and Germans among them woke up to a shock on February 24, 2022. Then Germany seemed to wake up when the Chancellor Olaf Scholz announced the so-called Zeitenwende, turning point, and the German parliament approved a special investment package in the German army worth 100 billion euros, a truly historic event in the modern German history. With hindsight, however, we are again looking at Germany with skepticism, because the German government has repeatedly put obstacles to the supply of weapons to Ukraine. For example, as we saw the Leopard tanks affair. So my question is Zeitenwende only an empty word? Or are we seeing a real progress in Germany, in German politics, in German mentality? Why does Germany remain a reluctant hegemon, even after an unprecedented opportunity has opened in Europe for the Germans to become a real leader?
Thank you very much for this question. I mean, the answer is quite complex. That's clear. I would say Zeitenwende is a completely empty word. I'm very, very blunt on that. I think, when it comes to Zeitenwende, when it comes to change of new epoch, we saw that 30 years ago. We heard that 30 years ago. We heard that 20 years ago. We heard that 10 years ago. We heard that for the first time after the wall and the Iron Curtain came down, that unified or reunified Germany. We are talking about the 90s. Unified Germany needs to find and define a new position in the world. We heard this debate. We had the debate then in the 90s, some years, a couple of years later, in the era of the Balkan wars in ex-Yugoslavia. We heard that after the 11th of September 11th, so 20 years ago. So that is nothing new. When it comes to the German society is a very pacifistic society. I mean, for historical reasons. So the Germans, they don't like war, they don't like conflict. The philosophy so far has been to pay, to support financially, but not to support military, not to support by concrete actions. And again, I mean, the debate. So the question, or the question about the Zeitenwende is 20 since 30 years. So it's nothing new. I think let's come back to that maybe later. But when it comes to this speech of Chancellor Olaf Scholz in the German Parliament, and I mean that is my personal view now. That is not the view of the Naumann Foundation, not the view of the political liberalism. I think that it was more a speech to gain time, not to change the time, but to gain time. Since I think that has already been mentioned, all of us, we thought, more or less all of us, we expected that this war, this conflict will be over after 2, 3, 4 weeks. And I would say, thank heavens, we were wrong. And I mean, the same in Germany. The Chancellor, he himself, that's what I thought. He expected that is an issue of 2, 3, 4 weeks, and then let's return to our agenda. I'm quite sure, although we are talking about the mentioned amount of money, which is not used anymore, which is not used so far, I think there was no concrete willingness by the German government to change anything.
That's a little bit sad, I would say, but we really hope for a change. And the war in Ukraine served really a turning point. And I think Poland is playing a big role in it. While Germany remains reluctant, Poland has become an advocate for Ukraine's needs and thus a natural leader in supporting it. Moreover, the Poles are really not procrastinating at all and are investing massively in their security. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, Poland is the largest contributor to NATO, with spending 4% of GDP on defense. So I would like to ask Piotr, are we witnessing the rise of new superpower in Europe? What preconditions does Poland have for this? And what about the other Central European countries? Has our role in Europe changed?
To what my predecessor said, I would like to add something. I mean, it's really easy to criticize all the countries creating the so-called Ramstein coalition, delivering weapons, supplies, and money to Ukraine. So from all these countries, it is like 50 countries, we could say only US delivered really stood up to the critical moment that we are all living in. And we can point out France, Poland, Germany, and others for many deficiencies in this support. I mean, Poland, of course, famously delivered these 300 tanks. Well, because we had them. Not many of them were in a proper shape and in a proper technical shape. So, of course, we are boasting. We are saying that we are in front of this tank coalition. Obviously, yes, because we just had them. We just had this old Soviet legacy equipment that can be easily used, easily transferred, and easily used by Ukrainian soldiers. Not many countries, including Germany, including France, has had this opportunity to actually possess such equipment, and that makes us maybe a little bit in the front of the countries, ahead of the countries like Germany or France. But if you look at year and a half, if you look at the list of equipment donated to the modern equipment, donated NATO type equipment donated to Ukraine, France, Germany, others are way ahead of Poland. So it's a really complicated issue. It's not like Poland is a absolute hero compared to Germany when it comes to donations to Ukrainians. Of course, it was the situation in the beginning, the first 6 months, that Poland was really massively donating this legacy equipment. But what can you say? I mean, after year or year and a half, is it really that Poland is still ahead of the others? No, because we just spent our supplies, we emptied our storages, and there is not really much left in Polish stocks to deliver. Of course, there is a story of this artillery crap. Probably you know about it, but it's not like Poland is all the time in the leading power, equipping, strengthening Ukrainian armed forces. So this first kind of a response to my
Sorry to interrupt, just to add, do you think it is at least a moral leadership?
Well, moral. Well, Poland in the history was always this moral superpower, which I really value and cherish this Polish history. But it's not about right now. It's not about propaganda. It's not about, but it's about real support that we can extend to Ukrainians. And I think, generally speaking, besides United States, everyone is doing what they can. Supplying what they can to Ukrainians, and it's not enough. Obviously, if it was enough, Ukrainians would be right now in Tokmak, in Melitopol, rather than grinding somewhere around Robotyne. So it's just a situation of all European countries that were living in this strategic pause, in this strategic period of peaceful dividend. In the last 30, 40 years, all these countries were kind of living in this dream or fantasy that the armed conflict like we observe in Ukraine will not happen in Europe, and they were just enjoying this moment of this period of relative stability. And we are trying right now to catch up with the history. So, of course, you can criticize Zeitenwende. You can criticize that Germany just first time in the history they adapted this national strategy of defense, national defense strategy. Of course, it's something to maybe even make some jokes about. But it's like we have to understand the situation. We do not make mistakes about this ahistoric mistake of judging the past from what we know now, and that's it about the donations. Is Poland becoming a new superpower, military superpower? Well, it was very unfortunate when Mark Brzezinski called us humanitarian superpower, and based on this assumption from the American diplomat in Warsaw, we fantasized, and it was strengthened by the many articles in Politico, New York Times, about this apparent shift of gravity or moving focus on Poland becoming new center of gravity in the military situation in Europe. We'll see. That's an obvious question. Of course, we are promising to spend 4% of GDP towards armaments, toward purchasing armaments. It depends on the many factors, including economic situation in the future, whether we'll be actually able to finish this purchases of this armament, and that depends on, of course, on the many factors. It's not over yet. We have to wait and see whether really Poland would become the most powerful nation when it comes to military in this region.
Yeah, Jan, would you like to react?
Yeah, perhaps just to relate on 2 points to my predecessor. So when it comes to this strength and unity that you initially mentioned, I would be a bit more cautious about how do we perceive this unity. It's almost like saying, the marriage is successful because they haven't divorced yet. So careful. The things we've been talking about, the German developments, but also in the broader sense, this growing divergence of interest between the Eastern and Western allies within NATO is showing that some sort of frictions are present there. Initially, it was about the deliveries of armaments, the special, well-known tank affair where Germany was reluctant to, whether they were forced by Americans or they reached the decision by themselves. we don't have to go into those details, but is it the end of this diverging vision? No, it's not. Now we are talking already slowly about some perspective for truce or for peace. And once again, we see a growing distance between Eastern Europe, which would like to go at all ends towards the Ukrainian victory, and we see the slightly different perspective from Western Europe, which is ready to negotiate slightly more difficult or even unjust terms for Ukrainians. And I think that this divergence is also bringing us to what you, Wojciech, mentioned about the war which transformed European Union as a, was it geopolitical or geostrategic actor that you mentioned? I mean,
Foreign policy actor.
As a foreign policy actor, I think that the EU has been put not by itself, but just by the sheer of the developments as a geopolitical, as a foreign policy actor. But the second thing is whether they are behaving like one, because I mean, at the end of the day, when it comes to Ukraine, the sheer gravity has been taken by the Americans. And one of the few instances where the EU could have played an important foreign policy role was, for example, in the Western Balkans. And once again, it were mainly Americans who were neutralizing some volatility in the region, tried to be instigated by let's say, Russian hybrid operations.
Yeah, thank you very much. We will address the Western Balkans later, but Europe will be the next question for Wojciech. Since the election of Donald Trump, we realized that the transatlantic relation is very fragile. And with the imminent return of Donald Trump to White House, we are again fearing what will happen. And of course, our security is, we are really dependent on US. And there have been discussions for years about an autonomous EU security project, even about our own army. But so far, we have not been able to unite. And with the anti-democratic changes taking place in Eastern Europe, for example, in Slovakia, in Bulgaria, we still have Hungary. I fear whether this is possible, if this is real. What do you think? Will we unite? Is the project of European sovereignty real?
Well, Europe is united as we speak in the stance of the Ukrainian war. And as I said, this war has had transformative effect on European position globally. It's not isolated from US. It's precisely because of skilled diplomacy and the coordination both sides, on both ends, in how to deal with global politics in the current situation, not just with the support in respect to Ukraine, that Europe stood united, still is united, and I will argue it will be united for, first of all, its own preservation and survival, because the foundation is still the peace project, and you cannot maintain peace in Europe without Ukraine winning this war. So you need Ukraine victory in order to preserve peace in Europe. And this is the fundamental logic that drives all political decisions across the continent. The peace ultimately in Europe depends on Ukrainian victory. So this is number one, and this is a common consensus, even though some politicians want to twist this argument, even if they want to say something different, you know, let's not support Ukraine. Ultimately, it's a general consensus, the Ukrainian victory is peace in Europe. This is how we attain peace. Secondly, this coordination, transatlantic coordination, goes both ways. Without Biden's administration's support and skillful diplomacy to unite Europeans, we would not respond the way we have, including the intelligence sharing that was unprecedented in the history, at least of the, of what we know about intelligence sharing, in how it was done demonstratively in order also to build diplomacy. But let's not forget that the outlook and the intel and the direction for united West has been maintained in Europe before Biden. And had it been not for the EU to maintain the ideal of a united West, we would lose this war and we would lose peace in Europe with Donald Trump. And because Europe has been developing global gateway ideas, whatever other ideas for how to maintain the united West, Biden has been picking up. If you look at April's speech by Jake Sullivan in the Brookings, he was basically picking up the ideas that were developed in Europe. So this is a two-way street in which Europe is not a military superpower, but is developing and maintaining the very ideal that maintain and hold transatlantic peace and the West together on the same ticket on which we have Japan and other countries across the globe joining and reuniting and becoming stronger together in face what is not just Russia, but is a threat to this kind of global order posed by the countries that believe they will win on the disruption, on disrupting this order. So in coming to this question, because you're relating to Viktor Hungary's speeches, annual speeches, in which he repeats this, he basically praises the future based on some global revolution, global reshuffle of power, global whatever turmoil, on which he hopes finally, after hundreds of years of trying, Hungary would get a premium because it was usually betting on the losing side. Well, I don't think he's betting on a winning side here either. And I wish he was, but definitely, I cannot see it any way. And you can see that each time he's leaning in. Each time Hungary is pressed, it is leaning in. And within the European context and maintaining European peace, I think in Hungary, where in anything, because I agree with what Piotr said about also German leadership altogether in the sense of a weight of what Germany can deliver, I think what Germany hasn't been taking seriously is its impact on such smaller countries that are fundamentally dependent on Germany. And Germany wasn't taking a clear leadership where it could have exactly in Hungary, and exactly, hopefully it doesn't have to show much more of a resolve in Slovakia, and Slovakia will maintain the course for the West. But this is exactly where you can deal with stuff as a European power that Germany is. Because it was too much of a free rider in Hungary and too much of a free rider in a sense of doing business with everyone who is our enemy. And I mean us, not they. EU is us. In the case of Hungary, and making this free rider, basically he's a late yuppie. This guy, and it's just gone. This world is again gone, and again, unfortunately, Mr. Orban and his version of Hungary is behind the curve.
But we should not really overestimate the importance of Hungary or Slovakia. These are really important countries. But still, there are centers of unity or centers of influence much bigger than in terms of importance than Hungary or Slovakia to be decisive in this struggle against Russia. So of course, everyone will welcome Orban on the good side of the history here. But it's not that he's decisive force in this unity, in this European unity.
Yeah, as I said, he's leaning in.
Just a question to your narrative about that Europe was united even before the war and was a precondition for an active role in the conflict itself. How do you position United Kingdom in this? Somehow they didn't need to be inside the EU to play an active role in Ukraine.
I'm just looking at the leader, but sure, Brexit. What was the first thing that people Googled after Brexit? What is Brexit and what is Europe? It was not Britain's idea to discontinue European unity. It was a mistake that they clearly are slowly recognizing if you see all the opinion polls, both on the liberal side and on the conservative side even. But even more importantly, Britain remained united, and the first steps they actually made right after Brexit, they consolidated cooperation in terms of security, maintained and renewed the bilateral agreements and multilateral agreements within Europe, European Intervention Initiative, anything that would demonstrate that Britain is for the common united Europe in strategic areas. They may have some differences in other areas, and they're maybe slow learners now in these terms, but in the key area, which is security, there was a unity. You mentioned strategic autonomy, the concept that in the latest speech of Ursula von der Leyen was not even once mentioned. Why? Because it's not about the slogan that is very dangerous, and it has been used by Xi Jinping and Mr. Putin each time a European politician visited them. They've been using it against us, against the West, because they were saying that Europe should maintain strategic autonomy from the US. Well, Ursula von der Leyen took this lesson and she said it is about capacity to act. And the capacity to act has been built up and is being maintained, and this is the course to stay on.
Yeah, I definitely agree, and I have to highlight what Piotr was saying, and also you, Wojciech. We can't underestimate the developments in Eastern Europe, because although Russia is firing bullets only in Ukraine, we see other challenges we are facing, and we are speaking now about hybrid warfare. For example, the case of Slovakia, unfortunately, disinformation campaign made Slovakia in 1 year changing from a stable pro-European country, let's say, to almost anti-Western, pro-Russian country. We are facing now general elections in 2 weeks, and it is really a big possibility that the pro-Russian anti-system party will win the election. And we have other, for example, the energy dependence. This showed us in the beginning of the war that we are so dependent on Russia, and Putin played also this card on us. Numerous cyber attacks. Yes, thank you. So I would like to ask you, Jan, if you think we learned something. How are the developments in this kind of area? Are we more sovereign in, for example, energy supplies and so on?
I mean, to be brief, I think that we could categorize that in 2 aspects. So first of all, this hybrid warfare has become way more sophisticated over time. Regarding Russian propaganda, if we compare Russian propaganda attempts for 2014 or 2013 with their practices nowadays, it has changed substantially. They started using proxies and implemented a way more elusive tactics where it's more difficult to identify that it's actually an example of Russian propaganda. So even those instances where you would have some speakers who say that I believe deeply for Ukraine, and then the rest of the sentence would be already narrating some advocacy helping Russia is a new phenomenon. Number 2, as you mentioned, we see that the hybrid warfare has become way more pervasive. So all kind of dependencies have been weaponized. All kind of supply chains can be used also against our advantage, and this just show that any single aspect, any single weakness that is present in the European Union can be utilized to Russian benefit, and they can play on polarization of society. You mentioned Slovakia, but I mean there were even cases revealed of the Russian interference in Barcelona and in the ongoing disputes between Catalonia and Spain, where it's just also playing on the conflicting narrative. But just to finish this note, if it was Russian propaganda alone, Russian hybrid interference alone, we wouldn't be observing what's going on in Slovakia or in the other countries. So yes, it contributes to the process, but it's not one-way process. It's about the internal weaknesses, and those internal weaknesses have some, foundations in internal politics as well. So we should be also aware of this.
Of course, I totally agree. And now we are coming back to the Balkans, and we don't have to forget about Georgia and Moldova. These are countries where the Russian influence is prevailing. And the Western offered a solution, a membership in the EU, maybe also NATO for some of the countries. And after the full-scale invasion of Russia in Ukraine, also NATO and EU membership was promised to Ukraine. So I would like to hear your opinions on this issue.
I would just maintain what I said about Europe as a foreign policy actor. Its sole influence that we can measure in terms of changing borders, which is known as geopolitics, is in this peaceful way of enlargement. And it is far from job done or even well done, but the measure of Europe's influence on peace and on the world affairs will be measured by the success of the upcoming enlargement. We have heard promises now on the political level, on the administrative level, the European Commission, and we should see it through exactly this big lens and test. None of the enlargement before had the European Union prepared for them. None of them. All of them were accidental in a way, and it had unintended consequences. There is now talk about EU preparing for the enlargement. I don't know if EU can really prepare for absorbing, for instance, the biggest country territorially, of all the existing member states on any European country, which is Ukraine. But definitely by having enlargement agenda, both for Western Balkans, Moldova, and Ukraine specifically, Europe can show that it's still relevant in the sense of making a difference, disrupting, in a positive sense, the world affairs. Without it, which is also an option, unfortunately, we may also see that Europe will go back into irrelevance, essentially, on the global stage.
But you really cannot imagine enlargement of European Union without Ukraine. So
you cannot.
You cannot imagine that. Ukraine, because of the bravery of its citizens and soldiers, became such an elephant in the enlargement room that you cannot tell that, for instance, Macedonia or the others will join European Union without Ukraine, or Ukraine would join them first and the Balkans later. So it became. It so heavily depends on the outcome of the war of Ukraine not breaking down because of this war. So I think putting too much attention, too much gravity only on Balkans in the sense doesn't make sense.
No, I absolutely agree. I'm in agreement that Ukraine, the decision and the final enlargement through Ukraine will decide it all. This is the key element. At the same time, just to put a grain of salt in there, once you cannot imagine Ukraine not joining EU, can you really imagine it?
Well,
that's another thing.
Yeah, exactly. This is. Ukraine poses so much problems when it comes to internal reforms, changing, transforming Ukraine into something somehow ready for joining European Union, that it poses all kinds of problems for itself. And again, the Western Balkans' fate depends on this process of transformation, of internal transformation of Ukraine.
I can only just once again say yes. I agree with Piotr, and that this is an exercise. This is an exercise in true leadership, in political leadership, because it will take a leap of faith to make a step which is about Ukraine. You cannot really plan it. Whatever is coming.
This is really a war enlargement, not a peaceful enlargement as we saw in the last 20 years.
Maybe just a quick note on this, not to make it too much elaborate, but often while talking about enlargement, either with regard to Western Balkans or to Ukraine, we keep hearing that those countries are ill-prepared, that they have these facade reforms, and usually people say that, well, look at Romania or Bulgaria, this example of enlargement from 2007, and then how under promised it came. Well, we are now receiving, hearing news from Western Balkans about, the Russian presence in Bosnia or in Serbia. Imagine how more difficult it would be and how unstable the entire region would have been if Bulgaria and Romania were kept outside of the Union, also on this argument that they didn't deliver the much needed reforms. So I would just, fully agree with the two of you that this enlargement is a geostrategic enlargement and it is motivated by our interest.
And to even complicate it even more, there will be no European Union enlargement of Ukraine, with Ukraine, if Ukraine will not first join NATO. Because NATO is actually the guarantees of Article 5 would guarantee that that Ukraine is safe and secure, and the Union will adapt Ukraine as a safe and secure country. So it's really a complicated issue, right, with this war. And joining NATO, enlargement of NATO is much simpler than enlargement of European Union. But because, as Henry Kissinger said, Ukrainian army is already a NATO army.
Natalia, what is the mood in Ukraine? How to prepare for an EU membership in the middle of a war?
Well, several points that I wanted to make during this discussion is that Ukraine started preparing itself to join the EU way before the war started. Essentially, our preparations started back in 2013 and 14 with the Revolution of Dignity. So we've been slowly making certain changes in order to become a member of the EU. So it's not a new thing. It didn't just start right now. Joining the EU is a goal. I would argue that joining NATO is a lot more important for Ukraine for obvious security reasons. Because our main goal in joining NATO was always this extra layer of protection against Russia. And it would also basically signify a transition of Ukraine from being this buffer state between NATO and Russia, which were, if we're being honest, that's what Ukraine was for a really long time, but not anymore. So that's the mood we want to join. And to add to the previous discussion, I would argue that, like it was said, the EU was not really ready for any of the enlargements. None of the countries were 100% ready to join the EU. So it's a bit ironic to be hearing that it will take Ukraine many, many years to become ready, because there hasn't been a precedent of some basically complying with all of their demands before joining the EU, and then after joining the EU, never hitting, let's say, a speed bump on the way, because we see certain negative changes in many countries, including, for instance, so I think it's mostly dependent on the EU's will to open up these doors for Ukraine. That's one thing. But I think the EU itself needs to do a lot of homework, because we're already seeing that this wonderful step that Poland took to help Ukraine by opening up the border, it raised some issues within the EU, especially when we're talking about the EU handling our agricultural exports that are mostly going through that border right now. We see a lot of tension, we see a lot of unresolved matters related to it. So I think this will be one of the priorities in the future. Because Ukraine is definitely very different. There are a lot of Ukrainians still left in Ukraine, and for agricultural sector, I think will be a massive concern for the EU.
Yeah, thank you very much. We are running of time, and I hope you are so tired that you have no questions. But we obviously didn't cover everything. It was impossible in this quick 1 hour. But I would like to introduce you and also introduce you our publication on this topic. The For Liberty Review. For Liberty is our think tank network of liberal think tanks from the Central and Eastern Europe, and we are preparing 2 publications a year. And this new issue you can find also here in the room, or you can download it from our website for free, forliberty.eu. And I thank you for your attentions. I had the feeling that I have so great panelists and high-level experts that they would manage it also without the moderator. But I hope you enjoyed the discussion and enjoy the rest of the event. Thank you and good night. Bye, Natalia.
Jestem z zawodu lekarzem, zajmowałam się diagnostyką chorób nowotworowych.
W Białorusi zajmowałam się mikrobiologią i molekularną biologią.
Byłem nauczycielem szkoły podstawowej.
Naszym celem jest budowanie umiejętności, które są ważne na polskim rynku pracy.
Szybko nabierają takiej pewności siebie, bardzo szybko się uczą.
Wszystko możliwe, kiedy starasz się.
Dzień dobry, to znaczy myśmy się dzisiaj widzieli. Wie pan co, ja zmieniłem zdanie i chciałbym poprawić. Karty w urnie. Dobrze, to ja sobie poszukam.
Serio? Pan sobie poszuka?
Nadchodzące wybory są zbyt ważne, by zostawić je bez kontroli. Dołącz do obywatelskiej kontroli wyborów. Zróbmy wybory bez piecu.
It's not always easy to recognize. It may look like this, or like this. It may be a burden, but it is a responsibility that we embrace nonetheless. But if it means this for one person and this for someone else, maybe it ultimately means being there for one another. It isn't handed to us, but we know where to find it. And how it feels, how it tastes, and what it sounds like when we finally have it. It means different things to different people, but for many, it means everything. And if we all fight for it, it will eventually bring us together.
Ihrer Ausreise.
Każdy wybór ma swoje konsekwencje.
Dziś na kazaniu o takich jak ty mówili, że to morderczynie.
A wiesz, że ta, która ci pomogła, trafi za kraty?
Trzeba mieć sumienie.
Jak mogłaś to zrobić własnej matce?
Aborcja to najgorsza zbrodnia.
Gdybym ja podjęła taką decyzję, nie byłoby cię tutaj.
Organy państwa nie będą przyglądać się temu obojętnie.
Życie i zdrowie kobiety jest najważniejsze.
Stop kryminalizacji aborcji.
Kobieta decyduje.